If you watched the first video in this series that we released back in November, you already know this strategy works. Now that video did extremely well, but more importantly, since it went live just a couple months ago, we've helped dozens of veterans get started with our Veteran Wealth Multiplier system to literally triple the value of their VA disability compensation. And we've done it without filing a single new claim, without increasing anyone's VA rating, and most importantly, without taking away access to their money. So today we're going to look at two cases, ones that we did recently, just in the last couple of months, and these were involving real veterans that we worked with. And we're going to show you how we designed those cases, why we designed them the way that we did, and really give you an idea of how this system works. Because in the end, it's all about empowering veterans with education so that you can decide what's best for your family. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so let's start out by talking about why this matters and kind of why we came up with this system in the first place. So VA disability benefits, as you know, they're one of the most reliable sources of income that's available in the country today, all right? The payments arrive just like a pension would, right? They show up monthly. It's often a lifelong benefit, and really they provide that crucial stability for, honorable veterans who have served our nation. Now the problem is that most veterans will generally spend this VA disability, and oftentimes they're not thinking about powerful strategies that are designed to multiply the benefits or even extend it beyond their natural lives, right? Take it as a benefit that's given to them and turn it into a source of lasting wealth and family security. And literally that can mean the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime and potentially millions over the course of multiple generations. Now the problem really comes down to strategic placement and strategic leverage of those funds, right? If there's no strategic planning in the beginning, that money, even though it's tax-free, is just simply going to either sit in accounts or it's just going to be transferred to whatever sources, whether they be bills, whether they be consumer items. The money's not going to compound tax-free, right? It's not going to compound at all. It's just going to sit or it's going to deplete. And in the end, those benefits are going to die when the veteran does, right? There's no family legacy on the back end of that. Your family is not going to continue to receive your VA disability income, which in many cases can be thousands of dollars per month. It could be over $4,000 a month in many cases. They're not going to receive any of that after you pass away. So essentially, doing nothing equals lost opportunity in this case, because the cost of inaction ultimately compounds over the course of decades and even generations. Now, when we look at the Veteran Wealth Multiplier system, this was a system that we designed to help veterans transform those same VA disability income payments into a source of lasting financial security and wealth for the family, okay? And we have several components to that. One, we want to multiply that income over the course of, let's say 20 or 30 years, right? So instead of receiving $150,000 over the course of that time, we transform that into close to $500,000 of total value, okay? But we also want to be able to maintain access to the money. We're not trying to take any portion of that and lock it away in any kind of a resource or vehicle that we wouldn't be able to access it if we absolutely needed it, and without penalties, okay? We also want to avoid market risk, all right? And this is a critical one, right? We don't want veterans just going out there just investing in high-risk stocks and ETFs and whatnot where they could potentially lose money in the markets. At Victory X, we're all about safe money. Now, as we talked about in the intro, I just want to make some clarification before we dive in here, right? What is this system not about? Well, we're not generating any new VA claims. Okay, most of our clients are already at 100%, right? They're already maxed out on what the VA is going to provide them in terms of compensation. So we're not going back and we're filing additional VA paperwork. We're not even navigating the VA system, period, right? We're just taking what is currently being allotted. Okay, so we're not looking to increase your rating at all. Your current disability rating is going to remain exactly as it is. I mean, unless you have room for potential increases and you wanted to address that as a separate topic, we're going to keep it exactly as it is, and we're not going to replace your benefits with any kind of third-party funding sources, okay? This funding is still going to come from the VA. It's still going to be guaranteed for life, and it's still going to be based on your given VA rating, okay? All we're simply doing is repositioning a portion of that existing income into a wealth building vehicle that's designed specifically for veterans, okay? That's what makes this unique, is that this is a system that is designed specifically for veterans to transform a portion of your VA compensation into a larger sum of wealth, and our goal is to at least triple that value. All right, so let's look at our first case here. So this is James. Now, obviously, that's not his real name, but we're changing the names to protect the innocent here, okay? James is a 46-year-old Army vet that came to us after he obviously separated, transitioned to civilian life, okay? And he was rated at 100% from the VA, so he receives about $4,300 per month in tax-free benefits. Now, I'll go ahead and link down in the description notes the va.gov website, so you can go back and verify these numbers, okay? These numbers are current as of the time of this filming in 2026. $4,300 a month is what he receives, roughly speaking, okay? Now, like many veterans, he's very grateful for this reliable income stream, okay? There are very valid reasons why he receives it. He uses it primarily to cover his family's expenses and kind of maintain that comfortable lifestyle. However, he's kind of looking down the road and thinking, you know, if something were to happen to me, this income is going to go away. Okay. And oh, by the way, you know, it's going to maybe go up with cost of living adjustments potentially every year. But am I really doing the most that I possibly can to increase the value of this? Okay. Is there something else that I could be doing that would give me an even more comfortable lifestyle in my retirement years that I'm not doing right now with these funds that are guaranteed? Okay. Do I really need to use all of this money right now? Or could I possibly take a portion of it and grow it even bigger, 3 to 4 times the amount, the size of it as it is today? Could I grow that over time? And the answer is yes. Okay, so his goal is to make his VA disability income work harder for his future, but without exposing his family to any kind of market risk and without losing access to the money along the way, right? If there are emergencies or anything that comes up, you know, in the meantime, he still wants to know that he has his nest egg there, that he has those safe funds that he has access to, and that he can do that without completely derailing the plan. All right, so what we're going to do is take a look at the strategy overview, and then we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on the illustration so you can see how the numbers all match up. So after looking at James's financial situation and his overall long-term goals, we designed a strategy using our Veteran Wealth Multiplier system where James can reposition $1,000 a month out of the $4,300, so roughly 23%. He can reposition those into a wealth building system, and he's going to do that over the course of 19 years. So we're going to fund an indexed universal life policy specifically designed for cash value accumulation, right? So again, policy design is very critical here. How we fund this and how we design this are going to determine how efficiently this performs. So we're going to reposition $1,000 a month out of the $4,300 into the IUL policy over 19 years. We're going to consistently contribute from ages 46 to age 65, and then we're just going to let it grow on its own while we're taking distributions. So again, we're using an IUL policy designed for maximum cash value accumulation. And what this is going to do, it's going to give him 2 critical protections in this case. One, he's going to be 100% protected from market loss, right? He's got a 0%, in many cases a 1% floor, that he'll never actually lose money in the policy, never lose money during any stock market crashes in the future, and he has no loss of access to his accumulated value during that time. So as his money is growing, if he needs access to it before he starts drawing his future income, he has that access. Now, we started with a death benefit of $170,000, and I know that seems kind of like a skewed number. You say, well, why would we start with just $170,000? Well, the answer really is in how the IRS treats life insurance policies, specifically the cash values in life insurance policies in order to maintain the tax-free growth. Okay, so the IRS requires that we have a minimum death benefit relative to the cash value in order to maintain tax-free treatment of the cash accumulation. So in James's situation, we ran the numbers and we found that $170,000 represents the lowest amount of insurance that we can add on to the policy in order to keep all of the growth tax-free. And incidentally, it also keeps our policy costs down, right? We don't want a whole bunch of insurance. The objective here is not to buy some massive death benefit, right? Could we do that? Sure. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to minimize it down to just what the IRS will let us get away with. Okay, so this isn't just an unnecessary add-on or some kind of a sales tactic, right? The insurance component is required by law. If we don't have enough insurance, the policy it becomes what's called a modified endowment contract or a MEC. And if it becomes a MEC, then all of our gains and all of our income, even in the form of policy loans from there on out, become taxable income, okay? So we want to take that $1,000 a month that he's putting into the policy, which is already non-taxable, and basically keep it growing in a non-taxable format. And then we're not paying any extra on top of whatever we need to just cover the cost of the insurance. So this is essentially the vehicle that enables tax-free wealth accumulation while also providing, some semblance of family protection, okay? So if something were to happen to James the day after he makes that first $1,000 a month premium, his family's still going to receive $170,000. That number is just going to grow from there because we've set it as an increasing death benefit that we're later going to level off when he starts taking income so that we minimize the policy fees even more later on. Okay, so just to reiterate on that, so James is going to have protection from day one. His family's going to have protection because he has an immediate death benefit of $170,000. So again, if something were to happen to him on that first day of the policy, his family still receives that $170,000. Okay, so we have 100% coverage from day one. Now, there's some common myths out there about indexed universal life, okay? That IULs are just very expensive, that they eat up your money in fees, they're gonna crash and burn. Okay, we hear this statement repeated constantly in financial circles. And like most of the generalizations, just like it, okay, there's a modicum of truth that misses the entire complete picture, okay? The reality is that poorly designed IUL policies can be expensive, okay? We don't design poorly designed IUL policies at victory-xfinancial because when the policies are structured incorrectly, they usually contain high commissions, okay? They have unnecessary riders included. The death benefit ratios are offset to large numbers that are really not needed, okay? And ultimately, those costs are what can erode the cash value growth over time. The way that we design policies is what we would call a proper design, okay? Proper design just simply means we're designing them to maximize cash growth because in the end, there's only so many ways that we can split a dollar, right? We can have the majority of it going towards policy fees, or we can have the majority of it going toward cash value. We want the majority going towards cash value, okay? And that's why we design the policies with a minimized death benefit. We even structure the death benefit in a way that minimizes the policy fees even more. And we use an optimized funding schedule that ultimately is going to make for an efficient strategy. The cost of poor design and expert design, like what we're talking about, it can literally mean hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. So this is why it's important when you're working with agents like myself, okay, that you ask these types of questions. Ask how the policy was designed. Ask about things like target premiums and, what are the minimum death benefits required to get a certain amount of premium into the policy. Your specialist has to understand these veteran-specific financial strategies in order to design policies the way that we do. Okay, if they don't, this is not going to work. And in fact, it doesn't even work if we use certain carriers out there that don't allow us the flexibility to design these policies the way that we're doing in this particular situation. Okay, the carrier that we're using in this particular case is pretty much the only one that we could use that we can really optimize this strategy with. Other ones out there, depending on what flexibility and what types of policy design options they offer, may not work at all. So we design policies with full transparency. Okay, we're veteran owned, we're veteran focused, and we prioritize wealth over personal commissions. Okay, so every fee, every cost, every projection is explained up front. And that's one of the added benefits that we get with IUL as opposed to other forms of insurance like whole life, where we have much less transparency in how those policy fees are spelled out. Okay, we also base it off of conservative projections. We use realistic growth assumptions. The carriers themselves are regulated by, organizations like the NAIC and the government as to how high they can illustrate. But we want to use some more conservative projections because our goal in the end is essentially to underpromise and overdeliver and not the opposite. We don't use inflated numbers just to close sales. Okay, again, we want to minimize insurance costs along the way, so we use the lowest death benefit ratio possible to maintain our tax-free status within IRS regulations. And we want to maximize the working capital so that more of your dollars are building wealth in the policy rather than simply paying for unnecessary expenses and high amounts of death benefit. Now, when we're talking about policy costs in relation to the total accumulation and the total income values, this is kind of what we're talking about. So if we were to fast forward to age 75, okay, where we're about 75% into this strategy, it's about 3 decades worth of growth, we've got over $1 million of death benefit. Okay, so his death benefit has grown to over $1 million, and you can see here that his total policy costs for the entire year at age 75 are only $600 for the entire year. He's got $1 million of death benefit built up and only $600 of annual costs, roughly $50 a month, and he's not even having to come out of pocket for that. That's just simply coming off of his cash values. Okay, so that's the actual cost of the insurance when the policy is designed correctly from day one. So if James lives to 85 years old, this is where the true power of this strategy is really going to shine, okay? Because in that time, he's basically, remember, he's repositioned about $228,000 total of VA disability comp. And he's going to start taking that $40,000 a year, which is going to be added back to the full value of his VA comp. And he's going to take that for over 20 years. And that's going to equal out to about $790,000 of tax-free income. And even if he spends every single dime of that, because we're talking about income that's on top of his pension, on top of the full value of his VA comp, on top of his Social Security and any other income that he has. And even if he spends every single dime of the $790,000, his family is still going to receive $309,000 tax-free at the end of his life. Okay, so when you add those together, $790,000 of income, $309,000 of tax-free death benefit, you add those together, that's over $1 million of tax-free benefit from just simply repositioning $228,000. So we've taken $228,000 and we've converted it into over $1 million that's now going to stay in his family for generations to come. So let's go ahead and jump over to our illustration now so we can see what these numbers actually look like. All right, so now we're looking at the illustration. So we can see up at the top, we started with $170,000 of death benefit. Okay, that was enough for us to be able to get in the full amount that he wanted to over the course of the 19 years. Okay, now by the end of the first year, you can see after we've gotten the $12,000 in, right, the $1,000 a month repositioned from his VA compensation, his death benefit has actually gone up to $180,000, and he's starting to build cash value in the policy that's going to go up every single year regardless of the market conditions, okay? Even if we get a 0 year here and there, he's still going to have bonuses that are going to give him at least 1% in this particular policy with this strategy. All right, and his death benefit and his cash values are going to continue to go up year after year, all the way up until age 65. Now, at age 65, he's going to stop funding the policy altogether. And again, he's put in about $228,000. And he's getting ready to start drawing income and again, regaining that $12,000 that he was putting in before. Now, at age 65, his cash values have grown to almost $428,000, and his death benefit has grown to almost $600,000. And then at that point, we're going to level off that death benefit, right? Because we don't want those policy charges to increase over time and to just get more and more expensive as he gets older and he's trying to draw income. So we're going to level that death benefit back off to basically what it was before, the $170,000 minus the increased cash value at that point. So now it's down to about $509,000, and he's going to start drawing almost $40,000 a year every single year, tax-free, and that's going to continue essentially for the rest of his life. So again, if we come down here and we're looking at, let's say, age 86, right, because it's a simple number right below there. By age 86, he's drawn $838,000, almost $839,000 of tax-free income the entire time, right, that he's been also receiving his pension, his VA disability comp, his Social Security, and any other forms of income. And if he passes away at age 86, his family is still going to receive almost $307,000. Now, heaven forbid, if he were to pass away sooner, yeah, of course, he's not going to have drawn as much income, but his family's going to receive more money than they would have if he had depleted the death benefit even more by living longer. Okay, so if he passes away at age 74, for instance, and he's, drawn out somewhere in the ballpark of about $350,000 or so, his death benefit at that age is going to be over $400,000. Okay, and if he lives even longer, right, if he comes all the way down here to, almost 100 years old, it actually starts to go back up again, right? Because the cash value accumulation is going to force the death benefit to actually increase. All right, now let's compare that to the alternative scenario where James basically does nothing, okay? He just simply collects the $1,000 a month, he spends it, it leaves his family, and he has no real strategic repositioning in mind. Okay, so the total that he would have collected over the course of that same 39-year period from age 46 to 85 is about $468,000, okay? Now, there's no growth at all generated off of that. There is literally zero compounding interest, right? There's no wealth multiplication. And there's also no family legacy associated, okay? When he passes away at age 85 in this scenario, his family gets nothing, okay? The benefit basically ends when he does. Okay, so when you look at that opportunity cost, I mean, it really is mind-blowing. When you think about it, by doing nothing, James is missing out on over $629,000 in additional benefit. Okay, we basically said that in income and death benefit alone, he's going to receive over $1 million, right, during that time frame. So the difference, he's missing out $629,000, and that's money that could have funded his retirement, could have paid for things like his grandchildren's education if he wanted to, or just simply provide financial security for his spouse. So that's why we really emphasize this strategy and why it matters so much for our nation's veterans. Now, in the scenario that we just illustrated, for simplicity's sake, we just sort of kept it as a simple fund and take income later type strategy, right? We treated the IUL policy just kind of like a 401k or a TSP account, right? Where all we're doing is we're just simply putting money into the policy, and then later on, after we've accumulated a certain amount of money, then we're going to start taking income against that accumulation value. But there's a bonus strategy involved here, right? Because with IUL, we have liquidity that other financial vehicles don't necessarily offer, at least not without penalty. Okay, so beyond that wealth accumulation and tax-free income, you also have the ability, James has the ability in this case, to function as his own bank. So that liquidity, the access to your accumulated cash value, allows you to basically borrow against your death benefit anytime you want and for any reason that you want. Okay, so you can take policy loans without credit checks or any applications whatsoever. It's a very simple process. The funds are deposited into your account within a couple of days, and you can use them for whatever you want. There's no collateral needed. Your cash value and your death benefit basically serve as the collateral. So you can basically continue to grow your funds and compound your principal the same way that banks do. Okay, and you can set up your own repayments to these loan policies early on. We actually encourage clients to access these funds early on in the policy, because by doing so, by using these dynamic banking strategies, you can actually grow your accumulation values even more, which is therefore going to increase the income that you can take later on. And again, these don't require any bank approvals. There's no credit inquiries, no rigid repayment schedules. You own the terms of every policy loan that you take, including those that you take in retirement as income. Now, what is another major advantage of this? Well, when you compare it to other financial vehicles, right? When you borrow from, let's say, a traditional savings account or an investment account, right? You have to actually withdraw the money. So that withdrawn amount that you take out of that account, it immediately stops compounding, right? It's no longer invested in that vehicle, no longer earning money by itself. So let's say you had $50,000 earning 6% and you withdrew $20,000. Well, now only $30,000 continues growing at that point. But with policy loans, and this is why IUL is so unique and why life insurance is such a powerful financial vehicle, policy loans work differently. So when you borrow $20,000 from your $50,000 of cash value, the entire $50,000 continues earning interest, and it continues to participate in the index gains. Why? Because the $20,000 that you borrowed is coming off of your future death benefit, right? You're essentially borrowing against your future dead self. So you basically have money that's working for you in two places at the same time, right? It's working in the policy, and it's also working out of the policy in hand. So you maintain uninterrupted growth in your policy. You're able to recapture interest instead of paying it to banks, right? You're paying yourself back, ideally with interest, and you're ultimately accelerating your wealth later on, because a strategic use of these types of loans will actually speed up the cash accumulation in your policy and later on will increase your income. So real quick, before we continue, if you're finding this interesting, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because by doing so, it helps us get our message out to more veteran families and empower them with this type of education. All right, so now let's take a look at the other case and see how we help this veteran. So our next veteran was a 60-year-old Air Force vet named Robert. Okay, we'll just call him Robert. He served during multiple conflicts. He recently received his 100% VA disability rating. He'd been fighting for it for a number of years. But at age 60, he kind of had given up on the idea of building any kind of significant wealth. He just kind of figured that he had missed the window, and that at this point in his life, there was really no way that he was going to, have any kind of success in wealth building strategies, nor was he really going to be able to leave a substantial legacy for his children. He just kind of assumed that these were only available to younger people. So his initial reaction was, look, I'm 60 years old, the policy is going to be too expensive, the costs are going to eat up everything. But as we'll see, when we look both at the overview and the illustration, his assumptions were wrong. And the strategy that we designed here ultimately transformed not only his financial future, but his entire family's, despite his age. All right, let's see what we did in this case. So obviously at 60 years old, the biggest factor that we have working against us is time, right? Robert doesn't have as much time as James to be able to accumulate value, right? So rather than putting him on some 19-year plan where he's not going to even be seeing the income until he's maybe 80 years old, we basically set him up on a 10-year funding strategy so that he would be able to achieve his desired retirement at age 70. So he's going to fund the policy for just 10 years. Okay, his goal is to fund it at $1,000 a month, but in year one, he still had some expenses that he was catching up with. He had some home improvement projects that he was still having to fund. So we were going to start it a little bit lower, just $450 a month in the first year, and then years 2 through 10, we were going to increase that to $1,000 a month. Now again, he's not obligated to do that, but that's kind of his goal. That's what's going to get him to where he wants to be at the end of this funding period. Okay, so years 2 through 10, he's going to put in the $1,000 a month. And then at age 70, that's when he gets to start taking his tax-free distributions, okay? And these are going to be also in the form of policy loans. Now, the death benefit in this case is going to start at $125,000. Okay, because again, we're looking at this from the standpoint of what's the minimum that we can get away with in order to get these funds into the policy and still keep our cash values tax-free, and also what is the least amount to be able to minimize the cost of the insurance. Now, with just 10 years of contributions, he's going to be able to take lifetime benefits that then are going to multiply even more and continue on for potentially multiple generations. Okay, and again, he's going to have zero market exposure, so zero losses from any kind of volatility. And ultimately, this compressed timeline is going to prove that age 60 is not too late. In fact, it's far from too late to implement these powerful wealth building strategies. So first, let's look at his total contribution, right? How much Robert's going to contribute to this policy over the 10-year funding period and what that's going to look like on the back end. So in year one, we said he's going to put in $450 a month for 12 months. So $5,400 total in the first year. Okay, and then in years 2 through 10, he's going to put in $1,000 a month for 12 months, and that's going to be over the course of 9 years. So total, $108,000. So when we add those two together, we get $113,400 over the course of 10 years. Again, with no market risk, principal protected, no loss of access. He can still access the funds. He still maintains full liquidity. And in just 10 years, he's repositioned about $113,000 of his VA disability into a wealth vehicle that's going to serve him and his family for the rest of their lives. All right, and now the good part, the income that starts at age 70. And again, remember, he's coupling this with the income that he's regaining from his VA disability funding that he was repositioning this whole time. Okay, but at age 70, he's able to start taking about $12,000 a year in sustainable policy loans, or essentially withdrawals, that never trigger a single income tax. Okay, now he also has flexibility in those withdrawals. So he can take more, right, in years where he needs a little bit more money, and he can take less in other years. He doesn't have to take it as even withdrawals every single year. He also has the option to take a lump sum at any point, right? So if he needs, let's say, $25,000 for something special, right, he can just take a single policy loan and maybe the next year take a little bit less than what he was originally planning, right? So that $12,000 annual tax-free income, again, supplements his VA disability payments, which have now probably gone up over 10 years, his Social Security and any other retirement income, including his pension. And since it's tax-free, every dollar goes further than the taxable income he would have received from any IRAs, 401ks, or TSP. Potentially, this is going to add anywhere from 24 to 30% of extra value on top of what he's receiving. And then he also gets the death benefit, right? So essentially, he created his own personal pension, right? His own private pension from just 10 years of strategic disability repositioning. Now, I know you guys are smart, right? And I can hear it coming through the comments as I'm filming this, right? Somebody is going to come out and say, well, wait a minute, smarty pants. You know, if he was repositioning $12,000 a year to start, right, and now he's only taken $12,000 a year of income, why not just save the money in a regular savings account or an investment account? Why add this whole life insurance concept to the equation? And that is absolutely a fair question. All right, we should always be looking at this and challenging these strategies in comparison to other simpler alternatives. Because let's face it, at first glance, I mean, that seems logical, right? Just skip the insurance component completely, and why not just, take the $1,000 a month and put it into a savings account and access it when you need to, or not have to deal with any policy loans or complicated strategies. But the answer actually works in sort of understanding how money works when you're leveraging it versus when you're accessing it, okay? Those are two separate things. Think of them as sort of like accumulation versus distribution. So over the next few slides, we're going to kind of break down exactly what this means and why this big objection, putting the money into a savings account as opposed to an IUL, why that really misses that fundamental advantage that a properly structured IUL offers and other financial vehicles don't. So let's go back to what we were talking about before with the dynamic banking scenario, right? And we'll use an example of having $50,000 and essentially borrowing against the $50,000 as opposed to depleting the $50,000, right? So imagine you had $50,000 in a savings account, again, maybe earning 6% annually, and you needed $25,000 for an emergency opportunity, or you just simply wanted to take $25,000, right? What happens at that point? Well, if you withdraw that $25,000, you pull it out of your account. Now you only have $25,000 remaining in the account. So literally half your money continuing to compound at 6%. You've cut that growth engine in half at that point. So your compounding interest is now 50% less powerful than it was before. And ultimately, over time, that opportunity cost is going to compound tremendously. So that withdrawn $25,000 never gets to re-participate in future growth. The growth that you lose on that money over the next 20 years could end up being more than $50,000. And that's really what allows us to draw much higher percentages in the form of income every year from an IUL than what we would safely and comfortably be able to draw from other financial vehicles like 401ks and TSP. Now, if we flip over to the properly structured IUL scenario, like what we use in the Veteran Wealth Multiplier, now let's say you have $50,000 in policy cash value and you need $25,000 for maybe that exact same emergency. So you're going to borrow that $25,000 against your future death benefit, right? Your future dead self is going to loan you the $25,000, and then the $50,000 that you had in the cash value of the policy is going to keep compounding at, again, roughly 7 to 10% a year, uninterrupted, while you're using the $25,000 that you withdrew from the policy, that you borrowed out against your death benefit. So again, your money is working in two places simultaneously. It's in hand and it's in the policy. And ultimately, that's what's going to give you a much higher accumulation value and much higher distribution values later on, because your principal is never depleting. So just to kind of sum up this point before we get to the illustration. So the main differences between withdrawing from the savings account versus leveraging, right? Leverage means to use strategically. Leveraging the policy cash values are really exponentially more significant over time. So if we just consider these facts, right? One, withdrawals kill your compounding interest, right? Every dollar that you withdraw from a savings account or a traditional investment principal is going to stop participating in the growth permanently, right? Now, in some cases, depending on the type of account, you might be able to put it back in later, but you certainly can't regain the time that you missed in terms of being able to stay on that compound interest curve. It's actually going to flatten that curve when you pull the money out. Now, leverage, on the other hand, is going to preserve that growth because, again, you're borrowing dollars from your future dead self, right? You're borrowing it against your death benefit. Your future dead self is going to pay off the balance of those loans, and therefore your wealth engine is going to be running at full capacity because your principal remains completely uninterrupted. Now, in the cases where you're borrowing money from banks, for instance, right? In those cases, the banks are going to keep your interest, right? All that interest, thousands of dollars for car loans, mortgages, credit cards, it's all going out the window. It's leaving your household, your family forever, right? And it's just being transferred into somebody else's possession. But when you're using your own policy loans, you're essentially functioning as your own bank. So all those thousands of dollars that you were otherwise paying in what we call positive interest is now coming back to you in the form of negative interest, right? So if you were to go to a bank and say, hey, I want to borrow at a negative 2% interest rate, they would probably laugh you out the door. But in this case, we actually are, because we're borrowing at, let's say, 5% and earning 8, 9%. So we're getting that spread. And if we're paying ourselves back early on with interest, then we're increasing that spread even more. So the system essentially is going to keep your dollars with you in your wealth building system, in your Veteran Wealth Multiplier. And over a 20 to 30 year period, the difference can easily account for hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional wealth. All right, last point on this, and then we'll get to the ledger. So there's a second advantage, and this one is a big one, right? And it's not to be, so besides the uninterrupted compounding advantage, You have another critical benefit that a savings account simply cannot match when you compare it to an IUL, right? So, think of that scenario again, where now you've taken multiple policy loans over time. You've used them either for income or emergencies or whatever opportunities, right? Maybe there were investment opportunities that you saw that you were able to actually get your money working and compounding in two separate places at once. And perhaps you even borrowed heavily against the policy during that time. And now you've got, just a small amount of cash value that's temporarily remaining while you're continuing to build it back up. Well, what happens in a traditional investment scenario or a traditional savings account if you pass away? Well, if your account is depleted, then guess what? Your family's only going to get whatever small amount remains, right? So again, if you had taken the $25,000 from the $50,000, well, now whatever's left over, the $25,000 is all your family's going to get. But in a properly structured IUL, on the other hand, even if the cash value is depleted, remember the scenario we talked about before, right? If he were to withdraw and spend every single dime of that $790,000 that we talked about with the other client, his family would still receive that full $310,000 death benefit. So in this case, if let's say he depletes his account down to, $25,000 or so, and he still has $100,000 in the death benefit, his family still receives the $100,000. They're not going to just simply receive whatever's left over in the principal. And that gives you a lot of built-in protection, especially early on, okay, while you're building your values up. Right? There's no savings account in the country that's going to pay you $100,000 if you've only got $25,000 in it. So your family is getting a substantial tax-free benefit on top of what you've already been able to leverage or borrow against the policy, and there's no savings account that's going to do that. All right, so now let's go ahead and look at the ledger. All right, so this is, again, our non-guaranteed illustration for our 60-year-old client. Again, we started with $125,000 of death benefit, and that death benefit was set up to increase for those first 10 years while we're funding the policy, and then we're going to level it off so that our client, Robert, can take income tax-free for the rest of his life. So we can see here that we're kind of underfunding the policy in the first year, right? So our cash values aren't going to start really building up until that second year. The main reason for that is because we designed the death benefit around the $12,000 going in, and if we had less death benefit, then ultimately we're not going to be able to get that full $12,000 in every single year starting in year 2. Okay, at least not without meching the policy. So we can see we got $5,400 in that first year. That $5,400 of that, our cash values start to compound. In that first year, we have an accumulation value of roughly $3,300. It starts to build up in the years following. Okay, and by the 10th year, where we've put in $113,000, we now have about $124,000. So we have more accumulation value than we've put in by the time we're done funding the policy. But that's where we get to turn on the income, and we get to see these accumulated values continue to increase every single year, even after we're taking almost $12,000 a year. And again, this is on a conservative estimated basis, right? So we're estimating at roughly about a 6.5% return rate. And we know that these policies historically have outperformed this, especially with our index strategies that we use. Okay, we are not illustrating bonuses here. Those who would say, well, you're not illustrating the 0 years. You're right, I'm not illustrating the 0 years. I'm also not illustrating the years where the index hit 19% like it did last year. Okay, that's not being illustrated in this either. So realistically, we're going to be averaging out to roughly between 7 to 10%. Over the course of this, which means we're going to be, again, under-promising, over-delivering. These numbers are likely going to be even higher than the $12,000 that we were estimating. But even if we just conform to this particular illustration, we can see that the income continues all the way down for however long he lives, okay? If he lives to be 100 years old, he's still going to be able to take $12,000. His family's still going to get $51,000 at the end of his life, okay? Because that death benefit is always going to be just a little bit higher than the cash values, and we do that on purpose so that we maintain the tax-free treatment of the policy, okay? So again, if he lives to be 85 years old, he'll have taken $171,000 of income. Family's still going to get $93,000. So now we're up to what, $260,000+ off of $113,000, plus he regained all of the previous income that he had been repositioning into the policy the entire time. So if you're watching up to this point and you're wondering whether these strategies can actually work for you, well, go ahead and pause the video for a second. I'm going to put a link on the screen here. Go ahead and use that link, and you can book a free, no cost whatsoever, free 30-minute strategy call, and we'll go over your numbers and we'll run everything and we'll just kind of see if it's a fit. Again, there's no cost, there's no obligations. I mean, you could always take the information and run with it, but you'll get the education, you'll have a better understanding of what we do with the Veteran Wealth Multiplier system, what that's all about, and if you can use it to benefit your family like so many other veterans have. Now, real quick, I understand that this system is not for everyone, okay? It takes some discipline, takes some sacrifice, but I mean, let's face it, those are things that we as veterans are pretty familiar with, right? But if you're receiving VA disability income, right, you're rated and you're receiving it on a regular basis and you want more income later, you want to multiply that tax-free cash value by 3 to 4 times over the course of your lifetime. You also want flexibility, right? You value having access to your money, not just locking it away in some, mysterious vault and hoping that it's all there 20 or 30 years from now. And finally, you want a legacy. You want a substantial tax-free benefit that's going to protect your family and create generational wealth for many, many years to come. Then I believe this system is a good fit for you. And I believe you owe it to yourself to book that free 30-minute call. But just so that we're all tracking on the same page, we're not setting any unrealistic or improper expectations. This is not a VA benefit replacement, okay? Your disability compensation is going to remain unchanged. You're still going to receive it every month, and you're not contractually obligated to stay in the system for the rest of your life, right? There are surrender periods associated with life insurance, but you can always cash out at any time. And any gains that you've made in the policy, you're able to get back out, minus the cost of the insurance that you've already paid for. Now, this is also not market speculation, okay? We're not day trading, we're not exchanging cryptocurrencies. These are A+ rated insurance carriers that have been around for over 100 years that are going to guarantee and protect your principal against any market losses at any point in the future. Okay, and finally, this is not a one-size-fits-all. Okay, every policy is custom designed based on your specific age, your health, your goals, and your financial situation. In all, this is a long-term wealth building strategy. It's not a sprint. Okay, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's designed specifically for veterans who want to transform their reliable VA disability income into a system of generational wealth. It requires commitment. It requires proper design, it requires professional implementation and ongoing management, and those are all things that we provide. So again, if you want to see how these numbers can work for you, hit me up. Let's jump on a call. From Victory-X Financial, I'm Dan Farnsworth saying stay sharp, stay ready, and I'll see you in the next video. To download your free Veterans Wealth Guide, visit victory-xfinancial.com and click on the Get Free Training button. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more updates.